Vienna, summer 1791. Mozart is living through one of the busiest years of his life. A stranger arrives with an anonymous letter. The letter asks Mozart to compose a Requiem, a mass for the dead. Mozart must not ask who sent it. He must not ask whose death the music will mourn. Mozart accepts. But as his health begins to fail, his wife would later say that he became convinced the music was not meant for a stranger. It was meant for him. A few months later, Mozart is dead. The Requiem lies unfinished on his desk. So who really ordered it? And why did Mozart believe he was composing the music for his own death? Welcome back to EraSpeak. This is the story of Mozart. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart was born in Salzburg in 1756. His father, Leopold, played violin in the Archbishop's court orchestra, and he was a strict teacher with big hopes for his son. Leopold soon noticed something unusual in his son. Wolfgang had an older sister, Nannerl. She was already a talented performer on the keyboard. When Wolfgang was about 3, he began sitting beside her, listening closely, and searching for the same notes on his own. By the time he was 4, Leopold was teaching him short keyboard pieces. By 5, Wolfgang was composing small works of his own. Leopold wrote them down, note by note, because his son could not yet write music himself. Salzburg was a small city, ruled by its archbishop, with a modest court orchestra. It was not a place built for raising a child genius. Leopold saw an opportunity. If the world could see this gift with its own eyes, it would not need to take his word for it. He decided to show his children to Europe. Nannerl was part of this plan from the very beginning. She was 5 years older than Wolfgang and was already a highly skilled keyboard player. Audiences across Europe also admired her performances. But as she grew into adulthood, the path forward looked different for her. People thought it was fine for a young girl to perform in public, but not for a grown woman. The stage that stayed open for Wolfgang slowly closed for his sister. In 1762, Leopold took his 2 children on the road. Wolfgang was only 6 years old. They traveled first to Munich and then to Vienna, where they performed for Empress Maria Theresa. Paris and London followed. In each court, the reaction was similar: surprise, followed by applause. Reports described him performing with the keyboard covered, naming notes just by listening, making up new music on the spot, and playing pieces he had never seen before. To many people watching, it did not look like skill. It looked like magic. King Louis XV received the family in Paris. King George III welcomed them in London. Wolfgang was praised as a wonder of nature, a gift almost too strange to be real. But the tour was not only excitement and applause. Travel in the 1760s was slow and often dangerous. More than once, serious illness forced the family to stop everything for weeks and wait before they could continue the journey. Leopold kept going anyway. He was certain his son's gift was too rare to stay hidden in Salzburg. The tour lasted more than 3 years. The children performed in palace after palace, city after city. For Wolfgang, applause was not a rare reward. It was the sound that surrounded his entire childhood. By the time the tour ended, Wolfgang was no longer just a local child genius. He was famous across the courts of Europe. But this kind of fame belonged to a child. Wolfgang would soon have to find out what happened when the child grew up. Wolfgang grew up, and the world's response to him began to change. The child genius became a young man, and audiences no longer gasped simply because a child could play the piano. After more years of travel, study, and performance, Wolfgang returned to Salzburg and served the Archbishop, Hieronymus Colloredo. This was normal for a musician in the 1770s. Composers worked for the church, the court, or the nobility. In return for steady wages, they gave up control over their own time and their own music. But this deal did not work for Wolfgang. In Salzburg, he was treated less like an artist and more like a servant who happened to write music. He ate at a table set below the nobles, seated near the servants. His talent had once impressed emperors. Now it earned him a fixed salary, but not the freedom or respect he believed his talent deserved. Wolfgang grew frustrated. He wanted the freedom to choose his own work, and Colloredo refused to give it. Things between them grew worse for years. In early 1781, the archbishop brought his servants, including Wolfgang, to Vienna for a royal celebration. Wolfgang saw a chance to give his own concerts there and earn extra money on the side. Colloredo refused to allow it. Finally, Wolfgang asked to leave the archbishop's service for good. The archbishop's household did not let him go quietly. According to Mozart's own angry letter, Count Arco, an important official in Colloredo's court, sent him away, and even kicked him as he left. Mozart moved to Vienna, hoping to build a career on his own terms, through concerts, students, and published music, instead of a single master's wage. He was free. But freedom in the 1780s came with no guarantees. He had no salary. He had no steady job, no court, and no church stood behind him now, responsible for his future. He had chosen freedom, but how much would that freedom cost him? Vienna gave Wolfgang a fresh start. In the early 1780s, his career took off. He married Constanze Weber, a young singer from a musical family. He performed as a pianist in subscription concerts, where the public paid to hear him play his own music. For a while, it seemed his risk had paid off. His operas carried his name across German-speaking Europe. The Marriage of Figaro opened in Vienna in 1786. Its first run there did well, but did not last long. In Prague, however, the opera became a huge hit. Audiences there could not get enough of it. Mozart's relationship with Prague grew even stronger with Don Giovanni. It triumphed there in 1787, where it was first performed. But Vienna's response the following year was more mixed. Mozart's success was real. It changed from city to city, year to year. In late 1787, Emperor Joseph II gave Mozart an official court position with a modest fixed salary. It was a real honor, but it paid far less than his busiest concert years had once brought in. Alongside his career, Wolfgang and Constanze were raising a family. Several of their children died as babies, a common tragedy at the time, but 2 sons survived. The family also moved into a larger, more expensive apartment, a sign that people now saw Wolfgang as a successful composer. Family life needed money, season after season, whether concerts sold out or not. Then the ground beneath him began to shift. In the late 1780s, fewer people paid to hear him perform. Austria was also at war with the Ottoman Empire. The war hurt Vienna's economy, and many wealthy sponsors became less willing to spend money on concerts. Mozart had once earned an impressive income, but success on his own was never certain. There was no modern copyright law to promise him steady payment from his published work. When concerts slowed down, his income slowed down with them. By 1788, Mozart was writing letters to Michael Puchberg, a fellow Freemason and a friend with money to lend. He asked for loans, again and again, to cover his family's expenses. The composer who had once played for kings was now asking a friend to help him pay his bills. It would be easy to imagine this as the end of the story, a genius slowly forgotten, sliding into silence. But that is not what happened. By 1791, his fortunes were beginning to turn. He completed The Magic Flute, a German-language opera written for a wider public, not only for the court. It became a quick, popular success, filling the theater night after night. He wrote the opera La Clemenza di Tito for a royal crowning ceremony in Prague. He also wrote a beautiful new concerto for the clarinet, one of the last works he ever finished. He still held his official position at court. New commissions kept arriving. For the first time in years, the future looked truly hopeful. The final irony was that Mozart did not die after the applause had disappeared. In 1791, it was beginning to return. It was in the middle of this productive year that the stranger appeared. In July 1791, a messenger arrived at Mozart's door with an unusual commission. Later retellings describe him dressed plainly in gray, almost like a shadow at the doorway. Someone wished to pay well for a Requiem Mass, music written to honor the dead. The messenger gave no name. Mozart was told simply to write the music and ask no questions. Mozart accepted the commission and the advance payment that came with it. He kept working through the summer and autumn, traveling to Prague for the opening night of La Clemenza di Tito, finishing the clarinet concerto, watching the magic flute succeed on stage. But in November, his health suddenly began to break down. He was kept in bed, swollen and hot with fever. The official record gave the cause as acute miliary fever, a broad medical term rather than a clear modern diagnosis. The true cause remains unknown. Later theories have included rheumatic fever, kidney failure, and an infection that caused severe swelling. The popular legend that a rival composer poisoned him has been rejected. There is no real proof. His wife's sister later remembered singing through parts of the unfinished Requiem with him at his bedside. And according to Constanza, writing about it years afterward, Wolfgang came to believe something stranger than illness. He said he felt he was writing the Requiem for himself. On the 5th of December, 1791, Mozart died. He was 35 years old. The Requiem sat on his desk, far from finished. For more than 2 centuries, the mysterious commission has created stories of ghosts, curses, and murder. But the identity behind the stranger was eventually found out. The truth was not magical, but it was strange enough on its own. The anonymous sponsor was Count Franz von Walsegg, a wealthy amateur musician whose young wife had died earlier that year. Walsegg was known for an unusual habit. He paid professional composers to write music, then performed it privately as if he had written it himself. 2 years later, in December 1793, Walsegg conducted a requiem at a memorial service for his wife. The performance was presented under his own name, proof that the strange plan behind the anonymous commission was real, not just rumor. But the second mystery has no certain answer. Mozart left no letter saying that he believed the Requiem was meant for him. That story came from Constanza, years later. If her memory was accurate, the mystery around the commission and Mozart's sudden illness may have made him afraid. But we cannot know how much of the story belonged to Mozart, and how much grew after his death. The man behind the Requiem was no ghost, but what Mozart truly believed in his final weeks may never be known. Which do you find more powerful, the legend or the truth? Constanze still needed the Requiem finished. Under the rules of the commission, she could only get the rest of the payment if the work was finished. She first turned to Joseph Eibler, a composer who had worked with Mozart before. He began the task, then gave up. The work finally passed to Franz Xaver Süssmayr, a younger colleague and former student of Mozart's. His completion became the version most often performed around the world. One more myth about Mozart's death deserves to be corrected. Mozart was not thrown into a mass grave for the poor, as some stories claim. He was buried in an ordinary individual grave, the normal practice for a citizen without a noble title in Vienna. Even successful, respected Viennese were buried this way. The grave had no permanent marker, and it could later be reused. That is why its exact location was eventually lost, not because Mozart had been rejected or buried in shame. The applause had changed many times across Mozart's life. It began in royal courts, where kings and empresses were amazed by a 6-year-old. It moved into public theaters in Vienna, where ordinary people paid for their own tickets. In his final year, crowds filled the theater again and again for the magic flute. But applause, in any form, had never once guaranteed his safety. Myths turn Mozart into someone more than human, abandoned by the world he once amazed. The truth is more human. He worked constantly. He took risks. His income rose and then it fell. He borrowed from friends, and he died before he could finish the work in front of him. Genius did not protect him from hard times, but hard times never stopped him from creating. Mozart did not live to complete his final work, but unfinished did not mean worthless. More than 2 centuries later, people still listen to the Requiem he began, completed by other hands, but still shaped by the music he left behind. If you are learning English, your own progress can feel incomplete too. You do not need to speak perfectly for your voice to matter. You only need to keep adding the next line. If you enjoyed this story, watch our video on William Shakespeare, where another genius kept creating under a very different kind of pressure. And if you want to keep learning English through real history, subscribe to Era Speak. Every story here is also a lesson in the language itself.